The naval battle of Valcour Island, also known as the Battle of Valcour Bay, took place on October 11, 1776, on Lake Champlain. The main action took place in Valcour Bay, a narrow strait between the New York mainland and Valcour Island. The battle is generally regarded as one of the first naval battles of the American Revolution and one of the first fought by the United States Navy. Benedict Arnold, who had proven his military skills during the American expedition into Canada, was given the assignment of overseeing construction of the American fleet being built at Skenesboro, New York. Although serving in the Continental Army, Arnold had significant experience in ships and shipbuilding. Before the war, he had made his living shipping goods to the Caribbean from New England and had amassed considerable wealth as a result. Arnold's arrival at Skenesboro gave the American shipbuilding effort the leadership and experience it needed to make it an effective fighting force. Arnold assumed overall command of the fleet on August 7, 1776. Arnold was hampered with serious problems from the outset. He had shortages of almost every type imaginable, from irons for nails, food, guns, experienced shipbuilders, and most important, men with seafaring experience to man the ships. General Washington, defending New York, could not spare any seamen to Arnold. To make matters worse, Arnold was also facing a court-martial for being accused of looting Montreal during the retreat from Canada. The charges were eventually dropped, but precious time had been wasted in the process. Eventually, experienced shipbuilders from New England, New York, New Jersey, and Philadelphia trickled into Skenesboro, and construction of the fleet began in earnest. There was still a shortage of men to serve crews for his ships. Lacking volunteers, Arnold was forced to draft nearly 300 men, primarily from two New Hampshire regiments. By October 1776, the American fleet was comprised of 16 ships. In spite of time constraints and a host of other problems, Arnold had managed to assemble a significant force of boats to meet the challenge at hand. The British forces in Canada, under the command of General Sir Guy Carleton, immediately recognized the importance of controlling Lake Champlain in order to carry out the planned British two-pronged invasion that called for forces advancing south from Canada to link up with General William Howe's force in the Hudson Valley. If this could be achieved, New York and New England would be effectively severed from one another and the rebellion all but finished. Lake Champlain was vital to the British forces moving south, as upstate New York had few roads or trails, and troops had to be transported southward by boat. However, the British received word that the Americans on Lake Champlain were constructing a fleet to challenge British movements. As a result, the British invasion was delayed until a fleet of their own could be assembled and British naval control firmly established on the lake. Unlike the Americans, the British faced few shortages or other problems in building their fleet. They had ample numbers of guns, supplies, and experienced men for their ships. Arnold clearly understood the scope of British naval superiority. Through a network of spies, deserters, and prisoners, he gained a fairly clear picture of British intentions and general time frame of when they would set sail. Knowing he could not attack, he decided to let the British attack him. Arnold deployed his fleet in a narrow rocky channel between Valcour Island and the western shores of Lake Champlain. The narrowness of the channel would force the British to attack singly and would not allow them to bring as many guns to bear as on the open water. The only disadvantage was that if anything should go wrong, the Americans would not have an easy means of escape. Once in position, all that Arnold and his men could do was wait. The battle began inauspiciously for the Americans. The boat the Royal Savage immediately ran aground and was abandoned after being bombarded mercilessly. She was later captured and burned by the British. Yet while outgunned, the Americans exacted a heavy price of the enemy. The British schooner Carleton took a savage beating, with most of her crew being killed or wounded. She was nearly abandoned until towed to safety. A British gunboat was destroyed when a shot touched off its powder magazine, and two others were also sunk. Eventually, however, British guns began to find the range and pounded Arnold's fleet. Congress and Jersey suffered heavy damage, and Philadelphia was holed by several shots, at least one of which pierced her below the waterline and left her a sinking wreck. To make matters worse, the British ship the Inflexible arrived by the late afternoon, and in the waning daylight hours bombarded the Americans with its heavy guns. As darkness fell, the British withdrew into a line south of the Americans. confident that victory would be theirs with the destruction of the American fleet at daylight. Arnold, however, had other plans. Gathering his officers together, he decided to make a run through the British fleet. Aided by a thick fog that had settled over the lake during the evening hours and Britain's failure to post adequate sentries, Arnold arranged his ships in a single file, with the Turnbull at the head of the column. He ordered his men to wrap their oars in cloth to muffle the sound. Guided by small hooded lanterns at the stern of each ship, Arnold's surviving ships rowed quietly past the British, at times passing close enough to hear voices from the enemy vessels. Once clear, Arnold's men rowed furiously to widen the distance. As dawn broke on the morning of October 12th, the British were shocked to discover that Arnold and the American fleet had escaped. After a desperate search around Valcour Island, the British turned their fleet south in pursuit of the rebel flotilla, but a strong wind from the south prevented them from gaining any ground on the Americans. That same wind, however, also prevented Arnold from increasing his gap between his ships and the enemy. At Schuyler Island, Arnold allowed his exhausted men to rest. 3 gondolas, to Providence, New York, and Jersey, were found to be too heavily damaged to be further use. After they were stripped of their guns and other useful equipment, they were scuttled. On October 13th, the wind changed direction, blowing from the north. Arnold's luck had run out. The British fleet quickly caught up with the Americans near Split Rock. In a possible attempt to buy time and allow the smaller vessels time to escape, Arnold ordered Congress and Washington to hold their positions against the British onslaught. Washington was quickly overwhelmed and struck her colors. Arnold's flagship, Congress, took a fearful pounding, and the rest of the fleet received more damage. Arnold had but one option. He ordered his remaining ships to Buttonmound Bay, a shallow and rocky body of water where the British deep-draft ships could not follow, and ran them aground. He then ordered his men to strip the ships of anything of value, and the vessels were set ablaze with their rattlesnake, "Don't tread on me" banners still flying high. Arnold and the surviving men of the fleet marched to Crown Point, where they burned the remaining buildings and stores. They then marched to Fort Ticonderoga, carrying the wounded in slings made from the tattered sails of the American fleet. Carleton arrived at the remains of Crown Point on October 20th. Snow was already falling as the upstate New York winter quickly approached. Carleton was shaken by the unexpectedly fierce resistance offered by the Americans under Arnold. With the weather conditions quickly deteriorating, Carleton had no other choice but to retreat back to Canada to his winter quarters, effectively ending the British threat from the north until at least the spring of 1777. The importance of the battles of Valcour Island cannot be understated so early in the war. If the colonies were divided, especially New England from the rest of the colonies, the British had a real chance of maintaining control over at least some of the colonies, if not all. Arnold's genius of funneling a larger, stronger enemy into a smaller area, better suited to defend, similar to the famous 300 Spartans and later the naval battle of Salamis. Arnold, although a traitor later, his accomplishments here cannot be understated. He built a navy from scratch, trained and equipped the men, and got them to do exactly what was intended against the greatest navy in the world. Had he not betrayed his country, this might have gone down as one of the greatest military achievements in American history. The bravery, adaptability, and endurance of the American soldier turned sailor is deserving of our gratitude. These men were drafted to this position. They had to quickly train well enough to fight off the best trained navy in the world with drastically less resources. These men performed their duty with great courage, fighting the British, training cannon shots, and then to quietly row between British ships, knowing being caught would mean certain death. To then have several ships try and save the other men retreat, while after all this having to pack up and march back to safety. These men achieved a near Herculean feat. By causing the British to postpone their plans until the spring, Arnold had bought the rebels time to gather strength and resources that would be utilized at the Battle of Saratoga, the turning point in the War of Independence.